It's about time for us to be getting started this evening. We are so glad that you are here. Ray and Misty went down to Orlando for Lads Salaters this morning. I know. We'll be going tomorrow, don't worry. Yep, the van will be leaving at 8:30, and then quite a few families will be following suit. And it's going to be a great time in terms of the convention and the competition. But while we do have a number of competitors, it's not about the trophies, it's not about the ribbons. It's about glorifying God and watching our young people grow, watching their talents blossom. And it's a wonderful sight to see, especially year after year. So be praying for safe travels as well as good hearts in competitions. As far as announcements go, we thank everyone that participated in the Easter egg hunt last Sunday. We had 15 little ones and all the parents that followed them. And then a big thank you to the Pittmans that brought in a huge thing of pork, a huge thing of chicken, and a huge thing of banana pudding. This is not an advertisement, but if you have not been to their restaurant over in Fairhope, please go. It's delicious. But Chase is going to be giving us his lads speech, and the song of encouragement is going to be number 598, Standing on the Promises. We'll sing the first and last verse of that, and after the song, Joe will dismiss us in prayer.
How are y'all doing? I did my speech on Nehemiah. The name Nehemiah means Yahweh, and it has been comforted. Before we even begin reading the book of Nehemiah, the name reveals that the word of his book was intended to bring comfort. Nehemiah offers hope to broken people. This book guides us on how to overcome troubles and trust in God, while showing Nehemiah's prayer life, leadership, and faithfulness. To the Romans, Paul wrote, "For whatever things were written before were written for our learning, that we through the patience and comfort of the scriptures might have hope." And that's Romans 15:4. Although the Old Testament is no longer our law, it remains our teacher. One way we would like to teach you today is the journey back of time of Nehemiah. If Nehemiah were alive today, I believe that he could relate to what we are going through. Jerusalem in its ruins, he found leaders serving themselves, and he found brethren harboring the enemy. Although others in Nehemiah's time might have been indifferent, he could not be. He often could not let the reproach remain. He had to remove it. Our time together today, I would like us to focus on three things. All of them start with the letter R and resemble a theme that comes in the book of Nehemiah. The first one is the ruins. The book of Nehemiah opens, much as new does each evening, with doom and gloom. Hanani, one of Nehemiah's brethren, reported that all the walls of Jerusalem were broken down and the gates had been burned. And that can be found in Nehemiah chapter 1, verses 2 through 3, and chapter 2, verses 3, 13, and 17. Furthermore, the people that were in the great affliction and were suffering great reproach, the report broke Nehemiah's heart and almost cost him his head. When he heard the report, he sat down and wept. He mourned for many days and fasted and prayed before God. No doubt, when Nehemiah went to Jerusalem, he surveyed the damages for himself. The report that he had heard seemed like nothing else he had ever heard before. Like the Queen of Sheba, when she surveyed Solomon's wisdom and wealth, Nehemiah must have felt as if the half he had not been told. In some places, the destruction was so bad that Nehemiah had to get down off of his beast upon which he was riding and proceed on foot. Today, reports came in all the time about the sad condition of spiritual Jerusalem, the church. Yet, reports cannot do justice. If you have not seen it firsthand, then you know how. If you have seen it firsthand, then you know how bad it is. Many congregations of the Lord's people were in ruins today. The walls are broken down at the gates, and it's been burned with fire. Liberalism, legalism, materialism, worldliness, and years of indifferences have made their mark on us. Hopefully, the condition of the present Jerusalem, the church, touches our hearts as it has touched Nehemiah's. Many of you have wept and prayed and fasted over seeing this condition, and that's Lamentations 1:12. And my second point is the reproach. It was reproachful for Jerusalem to be in this ruins. After all, it was a holy city, and this was where God's people lived. The ruins were a constant reminder of people's sins. Some had defined sin as self-inflicted nonsense. I believe that this is a pretty accurate definition. As you know, if people had obeyed God, he would have prevented the enemy from ever shooting one arrow. There, as he did in the days of Hezekiah. And that you can find that in Isaiah 37 and 33. However, because of their sins, God allowed them to be carried away into captivity. So because of the condition of the city, people were in constant reproach. And in fact, the word reproach appears 5 times in the first 6 chapters of Nehemiah. Nehemiah first learned firsthand that he had just arrived, how shameful the present situation was in. In fact, he announced that the plans of the people enemy laughed at him to scorn. In a like manner, the present condition of many congregations is reproachful. Nehemiah even shows us how to pray to God and listen for his answers. In chapter 1, he spent a long time in prayer from the heart with fasting. He glorified God with listening to the Lord's attributes. He trusted God's promises to Moses to restore the people. He asked for success before King Artaxerxes. Once the king asked Nehemiah, who made him look so sad, Nehemiah said a quick prayer before responding. His prayer life was one of his primary reasons that they went from being a reproach to being revived. The third point, and my final point, is the revival. Paul Harvey is very famous for saying, "And now the rest of the story." Up to this point, the story of Nehemiah has been dark and dreary. However, I want to tell you the rest of the story. The rest of the story is not about ruin or reproach, but it's about the revival. As many of you know, the enemy ridiculed the idea of removing stones. Yet Nehemiah and the people would just do that. And I might add, in record time. Of course, the greatest revival took place in the hearts and the minds of those who worked within Nehemiah to help rebuild all the walls. Today, let me assure you that the revival is possible. Our God will help us as he did Nehemiah. As was in Nehemiah's case, time. Revival today must begin in the hearts and the minds of God's people. 1 Peter 2:5. If we desire the revival of the church, we must consider passages that tell us terms of revival. If it says, "For my people who are directly called my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, and then I hear from heaven and forgive the sin and heal their land," we must also study great stories of revival, and this is one of those great stories. That was 2 Chronicles 7:14. If we want to revive our churches, we should follow his example. We can do this the same today. In each chapter within the book, Nehemiah hands us another stone to start building up the work of the Lord. The Bible teaches us that it only took 52 days. That tells us in Nehemiah 6:15 to bring the revival to God's people. How long will it take us to revive the church today? That depends on what you do today and tomorrow. So let's rise up and build.
Great job, Chase. So let's rise up and build. As Christians, it's up to us to stand not just for one another, but with one another. And with Nehemiah, there was a point to where the Israelites were scared to keep building because they were threatened and they were deterred. But there was a point to where under his leadership that Nehemiah had them building the wall with one hand with their sword ready to go in the other. Because no matter what, the wall was going to be built. Even if it took twice the time, but with the proper protection, they were going to do it. And as Chase mentioned, it took 52 days to build it. But something that is often overlooked and something that is scary is that it laid in ruin for almost 100 years. The people laid in their own ruin for 100 years. So we have to make sure that we stay motivated, that we don't just have the motivation to build, but we have the motivation to keep ruin from happening. And so that is the call. Let's rise up. One of Nehemiah's key verses comes